And we are, just so that everybody knows, we're recording today as we do, but welcome everybody to another meeting of the Citizens and Emergency Preparedness community of practice. We're so happy that you can be here. I think everybody here has been on a call with us before, but just in case, if you are not muted and you want to mute yourself, you can do that just by clicking the little microphone on the bottom left-hand corner. And if you are, if you're not speaking, we do ask that you do press the mute button, just because then we don't hear the things happening in the background. Co-workers, or if you're working at home like I am, then it might be, you know, your dog barking. So, you know, just to minimize all those extra noises. And if you want to join us on video when you're speaking, right beside that microphone button is a little camera, and you can click that and then we can see your lovely faces. Always nice. Next slide. So we're, as we usually do, we'll do a quick round robin check-in to see how people are doing. And then I'm so excited to have Sarah and Stacy here with us to do a presentation on Connect and Prepare and the work that they're doing in the city of Victoria. You're in for a real treat. I'm so excited for that. And then we'll do our closing announcements. So let's get started.
Okay. Don't touch anything. All right, yeah, so my name is Sarah Hunn. I'm the Emergency Management and Community Liaison for City of Victoria. And here today with Stacy from Building Resilient Neighborhoods. And we're here to talk today about our Connect and Prepare program we work on together. So just a quick overview about what we're going to talk about. Talk about like the hazards here in Victoria from the more traditional emergency management perspective, which is where my background is. And then Stacey's going to talk about the resilience model that we're working with Connect and Prepare. And we're going to talk about our program and some of the stories from 2 different neighborhoods that we've worked with, and then look at some results as well as learnings and then plans for the future where we're going. So to start, hazards here in Victoria and on the island here, obviously earthquake is a major one, and then severe weather. We're looking at, especially with climate change, severe weather is becoming more frequent and more severe, and then structure fire, climate change, and then everyday emergencies as well. So we look at all of these in our programs, and we recommend that everyone have at least 7 days worth of supplies. So different areas have 72 hours, but here it's even longer because we're on the island. So it's even more imperative that individuals and neighborhoods are prepared. So some brief personal preparedness information. So if you're in BC, you've probably heard these statistics from the personal preparedness survey report that was done last year. So 54% of British Columbians say that they have emergency plans, but only 13% say that they're complete, and only 20% have any contact with neighbors or have plans to help neighbors in emergencies. And so because of these hazards and then this kind of general lack of preparedness, that's how we joined with Stacy at Building Resilient Neighborhoods, realizing that there's a gap and that we need to do some more.
So Sarah and I are just going to bounce back and forth. Hi everyone, Stacy here, and nice to hear some familiar voices, a few familiar faces on the line. I wasn't sure who was going to be here today, so some of this may actually be a bit of repeat and sort of talking to the converted already. But I work with an organization in Victoria called Shift Collaborative, and one of the initiatives that we've been running for a number of years here in Victoria is called Building Resilient Neighborhoods. And so we've been working for about 8 years in Victoria looking at neighborhood resilience, and our team really comes more from a background of community development and community economic development. And our interests, you know, we got really curious many years ago on why it is that certain communities are able to respond to different changes and challenges that come their way more than others. And so we really started focusing in on this, this lens of resilience in our initial work and looking at how can we foster that at the neighborhood level. So resilience, in addition to preparedness, is really sort of the philosophical underpinning of Connect and Prepare. And so the whole program is built around this idea of building capacity in communities to not only respond to the acute shocks and the extreme emergencies that may come our way, but also the chronic stressors. So we work a lot with different populations in Victoria, many of whom may be facing different health challenges, for example. So in addition to those everyday emergencies, when people have a health crisis, we're also looking at opportunities for people to be more resilient together for the ongoing stresses that they may face in their life. So, all of you will be probably familiar with this already, but I've got this little excerpt from the infographic from RAND. If you're not familiar with this infographic, Road to Resilience, it's a really great one. But I think it really illustrates philosophically where we're coming from with Connect and Prepare with this focus on resilience. So as opposed to a more traditional emergency preparedness approach, really focusing on relationship capacity, social capital as the underpinning of resilience, focusing on that long-term ongoing capacity and this, how can we really leverage and build on the strengths in communities. And for those of you who are in the resilience business, which is probably all of you, you'll know that more and more we're hearing the language of, instead of this idea of bouncing back and responding or coping with things that come our way, thinking of resilience as capacity that can actually help people to bounce forward. And so looking at how do we build the capacity for people to have agency in their lives and their communities to make a difference and make change. So next slide, Sarah. One of the things that we have found in our years of work in Victoria, focusing on neighborhood resilience, time and time again, we have a whole framework around resilience that goes much beyond preparedness and emergencies, looking at things like the local economy, local infrastructure, the degree to which people are engaged in community. But the issue that kept rising to the surface when we talk to communities is always this issue around connectedness and community connectedness. So the underpinning of Connect and Prepare, thus the title, is really about building resilience through social connectedness. And we've really chosen to focus in on neighbor-to-neighbor connectedness as sort of that key ingredient that we think helps people be more prepared and more resilient to all kinds of stresses that come their way. And for those of you who are with the health sector, this will not be news, but this is not something that's just specific to getting prepared for emergencies, but across the board, we're seeing that social connectedness is one of the biggest kind of critical issues facing communities of our time. So this little excerpt from a tabloid in the UK, who recently, I think it was in 2018, appointed a minister for loneliness. In the States, physicians have declared a loneliness epidemic. Certainly here in BC, tons and tons of evidence showing that this is one of the top issues that are facing communities. So we know that it affects people in a really ongoing way, and that it's really critical for health and well-being to focus in on connectedness. So that's why Connect and Prepare really has that emphasis. Next slide, Sarah. So we were thrilled to partner and have this ongoing partnership with City of Victoria's Emergency Management Department. We've been working for a number of years already in Victoria with an initiative we started called Resilient Streets, and it really honed in on that focus on building neighbor-to-neighbor connections and supporting neighbors to connect, get to know each other, and undertake activities together. And so we have a whole initiative that focuses on getting neighbors to the supports they need to do activities together in these 4 areas. And this is also really embedded within Connect and Prepare. So Connect and Prepare for us was an opportunity to have a bit of a deeper dive module that's part of Resilient Streets, but it fits within this suite of activities we're trying to support, which is helping neighbors to connect through hosting gatherings and celebrations, through undertaking projects together that are focused on placemaking, getting neighbors to share more together, with be that skills or things, and then learning together. And so Connect and Prepare is a module that fits in our learning together suite of activities. But all of those other pieces are really embedded in what we're trying to support participants to do as they work together on emergency preparedness. Go ahead, Sarah. Next slide. So just in broad strokes, many of you I've had the privilege of talking to before about Connect and Prepare, but this partnership that we have between Building Resilient Neighborhoods and the City of Victoria's Emergency Management, and the focus is on a series of workshops that groups of neighbors come together to participate in, groups of neighbors at the street or the apartment building level. So we've really honed in when we're talking about neighborhood, we're talking about micro level neighborhood. And Sarah will tell you more about the program design, but we've now run 2 rounds of the program. We started in 2018 and we piloted at 3 different locations, and we've just finished our 2nd round in 2019. I think, I've already spoken to this somewhat already, but what I know of what's out there in terms of the world of emergency preparedness type of work, there's a few things that I think make the Connect and Prepare approach somewhat unique, in that it's very, very grounded in a community development approach, and it really is focused on this long-term capacity and relationship building. So while we do this through this series of workshops, we're still in touch on an ongoing basis with folks that we worked with in the pilot, and what we're hoping is that we're leaving some social glue that may not have been there before, that continues to support different activities in the spaces that we're working.
So yeah, just a brief overview of the actual program design. A lot of it is focused around, we have neighbor champions, and so every neighborhood, which, as Stacy said, micro level, so either a residential street, a block, or an apartment building or townhouses, but just like that one small area. So having 1 or 2, or we found even 3 champions, depending on the site, is necessary. We start with an orientation with them, so kind of what's expected of them throughout the process. Then there's 3 facilitated workshops, which we do on location. Each of those they start out with social time, so a lot of times it's new neighbors that have never met each other before, and so really getting to know each other. And then we do a round of introductions, like what brought you here, why you here, and some interesting stories around that. Even we were in one building and there were people that had lived there for 15 years and hadn't met someone else in the building who'd lived there for 12 years. So there's definitely that social aspect of even just having people in the room together was really important. And then for the first 2 workshops, we go through kind of just a brief presentation, building resilient neighborhoods, and then us at the city, just some background from our perspectives of why we're here, and some of the science that Stacy was talking about, and then the hazards kind of from our perspective, and what is kind of expected of each. And then so through the series of workshops, the idea obviously is to become more connected as neighbors, but then leaving the 3 workshops with some actionable items and projects and things to work on, as Stacy was saying, like it's a long-term resilience. So it's not just we do these workshops and leave. It's the ideas that we're handing over, and then they start working on some different programs. And we have, between the city and Building Resilient Neighborhoods, lots of different resources and access to grants and funding and things like that as well. So very still involved with the neighborhoods. And we're just going to kind of give a couple stories. So I'm going to talk about Village on the Green, which is one of the sites that we did this year for this spring season, and just to kind of go through what they were like and what they kind of came out of the workshops with, just to paint you a little picture. So Village on the Green is townhouses. You can see them here. It's downtown Victoria. They're between 2 giant construction zones. This is an older picture from Google Maps, but now these 2 empty lots are quite built up a lot. And then also it's just just an area of town that there is some safety and security concerns coming into the workshops. Everyone comes in with some different motivations, but it seemed that this neighborhood and this group of neighbors, a lot of it was focused around security and safety. And it's mostly families in townhouses and also persons with disabilities. So through this series of workshops, so as I said, they're really at the start kind of focused on safety, but Stacy and I and our colleague Cheryl, were saying, if you become connected, your safety concerns will be dealt with, and we're kind of trying to move them away from that. But since Connect and Prepare, they've hosted 2 different barbecues at their site. This is a picture of them at the summer barbecue. And this is a site where, again, some people knew their immediate neighbors in the townhouses, but no one else. And they did this barbecue. And the first one, they said even when people dropped off food, even if they couldn't stay, and that they left. And talking to them, they said that they've established a network, like something that never existed before and does now. They have a small community garden, which previously neighbors, only people with plots had kind of a key to the lock to be able to access it. But now they've opened that up. They've removed the lock, and they've even created some plots that are available for all communities, or for everyone in the community to use, as well as places for the kids to play and learn, which is really exciting. They've also set up a WhatsApp group between the neighbors, so everyone that's come to Connect and Prepare, as well as people that weren't able to visit the workshops. They are on this WhatsApp group, and they actually had an incident one night where someone was breaking into one of the vehicles, and they immediately got onto the WhatsApp group and were able to kind of message each other and say what was going on, and to get police there and to stop it from happening. So that's really exciting. And then they've also applied for a Migrate Neighborhood grant with the city. So we've been helping them with that, and they're going to create, it's like a placemaking project, but also have a bench, but also have some extra emergency supplies for the community, because they don't have a ton of space, and it's a lot of low income as well. So having those 7 days worth of supplies is expensive, and also a lot of space. So having some extra there is exciting.
And maybe I'll just add in, because we kind of read through in the program design, we've talked a lot about the workshops that we facilitate, where obviously we're trying to foster those connections and encourage neighbors to think about what kind of actions they can take together to strengthen connections and preparedness. But there are some other carrots that we throw into the mix, one of which is that the city provides, as part of the program, up to $500 worth of shared emergency supplies for neighbors to share. So that's a big thing that they work towards, is identifying what do they already have, what do they need, and then some groups like this group that Sarah's been mentioning have been able to access additional resources when there's a need for additional beyond the $500 worth of supplies. So that's been something that's really motivated people to participate. It's often sort of like the gateway that motivates them to get in the door, but then there's often a lot of other spin-off benefits that we find as well. And through our program, we offer some very small micro grants for projects, so $200 project grants for people to undertake any kind of project that connects neighbors. So often that helps to facilitate whatever kind of future activities, as well as then there's other city grants that people need more resources than that they're able to access. Yeah. And I wanted to share, I don't think it's moving forward for some reason. Oh yeah, I was going to share about another site that we worked with in our pilot program. Again, just to kind of give you a flavor of what scale we're working with, who we're working with. So in our pilot, we had 3 different sites. One was a street with single family residential homes. One was a high rise and one was a low rise. So LeBlanc Place, which I'm sharing about now was the low rise. It's a building managed and owned by Capital Regional Housing Corporation. So subsidized housing, specifically this building was for seniors with disabilities. So 4 floors and 28 units. And what I heard a lot about from this group was because it was a building, or is a building for people with disabilities, the champions who stepped forward said that was their biggest challenge, was that, you know, people really on a day-to-day basis were dealing with a lot of stresses, a lot of health challenges, and just generally a sentiment that it was difficult to do things, that they more focus on the disability than the ability. And so they saw this as a real opportunity to come together and just start building more community. So Sarah, if you don't mind going to the next slide. We initially engaged with the 2 champions who are just these amazing 2 Wonder Women here. They're just astounding in terms of what they do for their community. My hat is off to them every day. So they initially engaged with us through one of our Resilient Streets workshops, and they were really motivated by this idea of residents building community and connecting with neighbors. And they got quite inspired and started with a very small micro grant by hosting muffin mornings in the lobby, where they would just put out tea and muffins and space for neighbors to come together. And out of that, they started talking about what people wanted to see in the building. And what they discovered was a lot of people were dealing with issues around food security and access to healthy food, a lot of people on low income, and a lot of people with mobility issues. So getting out to get healthy food was difficult. So they formed a partnership with support from Capital Regional Housing, who got involved with one of our local food security organizations to set up a distribution system of healthy food in the building. And they formed this whole healthy food committee, and to this day continue to animate and make that happen with residents in the building. And through that experience, they said, we gained the confidence that we actually could do something. And then they felt ready to participate in Connect and Prepare, which was particularly one of the women, Kathleen, was very motivated and very concerned about emergency preparedness, particularly for the population that lived in the building. But they let us know that, you know, they kind of had to build up that confidence before they felt ready to engage with the commitment of Connect and Prepare. So Connect and Prepare, we've already told you about. They participated, a group of neighbors got involved. Different neighbors came out to the Connect and Prepare sessions than had been involved in some of the other activities. So one of the things we learned there is, like, there's different gateways in. Some people are motivated around the Connect part of Connect, and some people are motivated around the Prepare part of Connect and Prepare. And both are really important and pathways for people to engage. But it was a really positive experience, and I think the big thing that stood out for me is this quote at the bottom. They said, together we focus on our abilities rather than our individual disabilities, and really what can we do together. So coming out of Connect and Prepare, they also developed shared emergency supplies, and they developed a buddy system in the building, which they were quite inspired by stories from CREW, the early days of CREW's work in Toronto. And then what they realized is, being a group of low-income residents, many people didn't have their basic emergency supplies for themselves in their own household. So they decided to access a micro grant to basically set everyone up with their own kind of baseline grab and go kit. They did it as a big party. People made the kits together. The champions themselves hosted and kind of facilitated the workshop on grab and go and what needed to be in there. And they continue to this day, as I said, to engage with their other activities around their healthy food distribution. So just kind of as we move to wrapping up, we haven't yet completed our evaluation for the latest round that we just did, but just to share, we have been, I think, really encouraged ourselves. You know, we approached this whole initiative, Connect and Prepare, as a prototype. We didn't really know how it would go. And what we have found is that I think we've really hit this sweet spot of this integration of resilience and social connectedness and preparedness. And somehow that blending of those three together really speaks to people, and seems to be making a difference. So these are just some of the results that we had from our pilot. So most of the groups indicated that neighbors had gotten to know each other better. There were a handful of people who said, oh, I already knew everybody already, but almost across the board, those relationships were developed. And even if they had those relationships, those were deepened. So a greater connection with their neighbors. People really strongly say I have a much better sense of what our strengths and our vulnerabilities are and what might be possible. And then all of them across the board have been carrying on to take some kind of action together, whether that be through a project or kind of more informal ongoing activities. So we're encouraged, and we think we're on to something.
So just some considerations that we've had both from the pilot and then from this new round, realizing what's the most important, or what are we looking at. First is the availability and capacity of staff, champions, and neighbors. So we all have different roles. So the timing of it and just the background, like as Stacy was saying, really that it's the blend of my traditional knowledge of emergency preparedness, but then taking that community development approach and then that knowledge that Stacy has in building resilient neighborhoods has in community development and even just adult facilitation is really important. And then the champions, so they're not facilitating, but the workshops, but they do a lot of behind the scenes work in getting their neighbors to come. And so it's really important that they're involved and have time, have extra time and reaching out. That's having high capacity champions and with time on their hands, we found is really key. As we've kind of mentioned, we've worked with different communities and different types of functional needs. So with communication, in one of our buildings, we had some participants who were hard of hearing or had vision challenges with vision, or some that were illiterate as well. So we've had to kind of alter how we present to help those people. Also, as Stacey was saying, some different medical issues and independent issues. We've had one of our champions has a brain injury, so just a different ways of communicating and getting our ideas across and what we're looking at, and then support and transportation. So so some, as Stacey was saying, some different challenges around mobility and things like that. So a lot of different needs to consider, and just making sure that all of our resources and everything are flexible and accessible. The importance of the meeting space. So in all of the sites, we've been able to meet on site. So whether that's been a community room, some of those have been better than others. So we've definitely noticed that we've had some rooms that are kind of more comfortable and inviting and places for the community to share, and that they're always in there anyway. And so we're just kind of like adding to it. Other ones, it was a room, but it was locked, and you had to kind of go through some steps to get access to it. So that was more challenging. And then we've also did one in the recent round where it's in someone's actual unit. So it was really amazing and nice that they opened their home to us, and then we were able to do that in the home. Another thing to consider is just the site selection process and criteria. So this last round of Connect and Prepare it was with a partnership through funding, and all of the sites were Capital Regional Housing Corporation sites. And so we had a smaller pool to pick from. And again, a lot of, we had one, like our champions were single mothers and were really busy, or as I said, like some functional needs and some medical issues. So there's some challenges around that. And then even just like the time of day that people could meet was important. So like if one with the seniors, we were able to meet with them during the day, and the other ones with families, it was more on weekends. So kind of looking at those considerations and what makes sense. So some other lessons learned, we've decided that we're probably going to add an additional 4th check-in, not necessarily a workshop, but something. These other workshops are usually around 4 weeks apart, so a series of 3 workshops once a month. And then the 4th would be a couple months later to like check in. We leave them with the 3rd workshop working on some projects, working on that $500 of emergency supplies. They work with me or the city on that. I work with BRN with the smaller micro grants and whatever it is that they want to do, if it's block parties, if it's a placemaking project, whatever it is, giving them a couple months to start to work on it and then checking in again and saying, how's it going? What do you need? How can we help? And giving them that deadline, I think is helpful for some. So engaged and motivated champions we talked about. So yeah, some we've had 2 and others we've had 3. Definitely if it's 3 is better, just depending on how available everyone is. And then as Stacy said, different neighborhoods have different motivations. So we talked about the one that they were really concerned about security. Some are really concerned just about general preparedness, and then others are more concerned about just getting to know their neighbors more. And they all kind of end up with the same results, but all have a different way of getting in the door in the first place, and that's been important for us. And then we talked about time of year and time of day, so just our availability, but also the neighbors' availability. This spring one, it kind of pushed into summer, and that did not work. So do not try and do every programs over summer, which I think everyone would realize that doesn't work. And then just the general need to be adaptable and flexible. Sometimes we don't really know, we talk to the champions and we get their understanding of the community and what's going on, but sometimes we don't really know what's going on until we're there on the first workshop, starting to do it and realizing, okay, the way that we're approaching this presentation is not going to work, and we need to be more, it can't be a presentation, we need to be more storytelling and sharing. And so that need to be flexible has really proven useful.
And vice versa. Some situations where people want the formal presentation and the credibility of the City of Victoria's emergency management experts in the door. So really
totally.
reading the particular context that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
So just in terms of like where we're at and how we're moving forward, and I also did see a question in the chat that I'll respond to in a minute. As we said, we just wrapped up our 2nd round, so we're getting ready and excited to be moving forward with our next round starting in the new year. We are part of a larger provincial initiative that we're really excited about that's just started called the Hey Neighbor Collective, which is a number of different municipalities and partners looking at how to build social connectedness, specifically in multi-unit buildings. So that's going to be our target as we move forward in this next round. We're going to specifically hone in. We always have had some sites that are multi-unit buildings, but we're going to really be looking at what we can learn about that context in particular. And overall, we are starting, even though it's still early days, as we said, we really feel like there's a lot of legs to this particular model. So we're looking at opportunities to scale this model. We're considering a train the trainer approach that we'll be rolling out certainly through our partnerships in the Hey Neighbor Collective, but also interested in looking at opportunities beyond that. And then City of Victoria is also doing some really important work to create other resources for people who may not want to engage to the depth that we do with Connect and Prepare. So they're creating what Sarah calls a workshop in a box, which is sort of more of a self-facilitated version of some of the content. We were talking the other day, and we're talking about this idea of like, the take a dip, take a dive. So what level of depth do people want to dive in? And some people just want to do that little dip, but for others, the dive where we certainly see a lot of impact coming out of this kind of more in-depth programming, but not everyone is ready to make that investment. So that's where we're at. I did see a question in the chat box, so maybe if it's okay, Glenda, I'll just respond to that quickly. Sheila was asking about financial compensation for champions, which is a great question and something we kind of continue to consider. We don't pay champions to participate. Some of our other partners in the Hey Neighbor Collective who aren't specifically focused on emergency preparedness, but looking at models of bringing neighbors together to build connections, they do offer honoraria. Our approach has been more to try and remove financial barriers and other barriers to participation. So, for example, we offer micro grants which cover the cost of any convening related to the workshop. So refreshments, if meeting room space is needed, etc. We also offer childcare subsidies, and we haven't needed to offer transportation subsidies, but if that were a concern, I'm sure that's something we would factor in. So that's how we've approached sort of removing some of those financial aspects that might be a barrier to participation. And then, so the second question was around how do we keep in touch with community initiatives beyond the workshops. And I think we're still figuring that out. Because we really haven't been at it for that long. So far, we keep in touch because we have these incredible relationships with folks. So we keep in touch via email and informally and just on our own. But I think as we move forward, we'll be looking at opportunities to build a more bit more of a formalized network or alumni, but we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, and then there's another question too about the workshop in a box. So that's something I've an intern and I are working on, and it's structured around the similar outline of Connect and Prepare, but just without us as facilitating it. Because it's with us in the city, it has some slight differences in terms of some of the projects that they're working on, because we really want to get them out, like ending this workshop in a box with having a select meeting place and some other kind of key things around preparedness there. But really it's the main part of it is a guidebook that kind of walks through the champions, what they're going to be doing through each workshop. And again, it's similar in that the first workshop is the why are we here and what's going on, and that's a similar needs assessment, and then going from there, okay, what are some projects or what are some activities and things that we want to work on, and then actually working on them. So it's definitely, we're realizing that this is for, as Stacey was saying, like a different type of community. So either one that doesn't want to do the full capacity Connect and Prepare, but also realizing, we've done 6 sites now in 2 years, and if we want to get all of Victoria or of everyone ready, just some additional resources. So definitely targeting some groups that are already somewhat connected or already somewhat prepared, a bit higher capacity in terms of abilities, and obviously it would have to be champions that are comfortable facilitating themselves without us being there. And one of the things that we're working on is recording some videos so that those can be there and add that sense of authority or something that I think Stacey was mentioning, that sometimes they like it, like, oh, someone from the fire department, like having that stamp on it. So that's what we've been looking at.
Yeah, and I'm a big supporter of the kind of dual approach of the deep dive and then the breadth, right? So the workshop in a box is an example of where the city can get more breadth. I will say, however, on our evaluation, when we ask people, would you consider something like Connect and Prepare if you had to self-facilitate? The feedback consistently is like, oh, we want the facilitation. That's actually one of the huge values of having a facilitated process and having external facilitators for neighbors to really, just to be able to really engage and feel supported in that way. So that is consistent feedback we get, is that the facilitation is one of the biggest values of Connect and Prepare. There's a question, I don't know, Glenda, if we should just keep rolling, but there's a question from Shannon about number of residents who attend the workshops.
Yeah, just keep rolling. That's what I want to say.
Yeah.
Questions coming in. Let's just keep going with it.
It varies. It totally varies because the sites vary so much. I would typically, we see like an average group would be anywhere 8 to 30 showing up at a workshop. What we have seen is that as much as we would love it to be the same people that go through all 3 workshops, that's rarely what happens. There's usually people who come in and out, and then there's kind of a core group that does participate in all 3, and then some neighbors will dip in for 1 or 2 or 3. And percentage of residents, that's also hard to answer because it really varies across the board depending on context as well. Yeah, it varies. It varies. I think what we're seeing and learning, though, I think I'm getting a little bit more flexible about how I look at this. Initially, I was really like, we need everyone out. And what I've come to think is actually if we can get a core group beyond the 2 or 3 champions, but if we can get a core group of engaged residents, that will ripple out over time. So there's always going to be people who can't engage with the workshops. And that's not our intention. I mean, it's great if people can come, but we want actually that capacity to live in that community and for those neighbors to then be able to make those connections beyond the workshops. So I'm trusting more in that.
Great, thank you. Sarah, I just sent you another question from Noor. Do you?
Yeah, so I saw this come in towards the beginning of the presentation, and then we talked a little bit more about the functional needs towards the end. So I'm just wondering if, Lenore, you still have questions about that, or if you want me to keep talking about it, or?
Yeah, if you can keep talking about it.
Okay.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah, so the question was, can you please elaborate on what type of disabilities participated and were targeted? So we didn't target specific groups for this one. I think in the pilot, there was definitely a conscious effort to have 3 different types of sites. So there was one that Stacey was talking about. There was a high rise that was mostly retired, I believe, and then also fairly like not high income, but regular income. And then another group that was a residential street, and then the third, which was a low rise, that was LeBlanc Place that Stacey was talking about, which was a CRHC, and with the adults with disabilities. So targeting that way and just having 3 different types of communities and neighborhoods, both in structure and in the types of people that are living there. So the residential street was obviously a lot of families versus the seniors with disabilities, and the third, the high rise, was mostly retired seniors or retired adults. So those different communities that way were targeted specifically, especially with the prototype or pilot, to see how Connect and Prepare works in different communities. And then, as I said, the second round was all CRHC. And so there were, especially the one building, Spring Tide, which was fairly similar to LeBlanc Place in terms of the makeup of the residents. It was mostly, it was seniors and adults with disabilities. So as I said, we had someone with a brain injury, and then we had people that, for a majority almost, it seemed like, had some type of communication challenge, whether it was low vision or low hearing or illiteracy. So, and then with that one, we kind of scrapped the presentations and went straight to storytelling and talking about different events in their lives and how it worked or what was challenging, and how we could kind of work on those for future, and what would help them and what doesn't help, and kind of going from there. Stacey, I don't know if you have anything to add about that.
Well, we have been very deliberate in including buildings specifically for seniors because we just think that's a really important population to be engaging, because often there are, I mean, social connectedness is an issue across the board, but we do see often higher levels of social isolation among seniors, and then concerns related to preparedness. You know what? We weren't targeting per se, but what I saw, for example, with LeBlanc Place, which again was the building with seniors with disabilities, was, you know, people had all kinds of, you know, ongoing mobility issues, et cetera, but there were a lot of chronic health issues. And one of our learnings in that community was the importance of ensuring that there were enough champions engaged, because literally, I think in the course of us running the program with that building, our champions were in and out of the hospital probably 4 times, just dealing with chronic health things. So they themselves actually initiated pulling in an additional champion to make sure they could kind of cover each other off, and knowing that was a concern. So they've been really strategic and thoughtful about how to ensure they kind of keep things going and spell each other off, and knowing that they have some health challenges.
Great. I just want to thank everybody so much for coming out. And Stacey and Sarah, oh my goodness, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate all the time and effort you've put into the program that you've been developing, and also just sharing it with us. That's been great. And to everybody else with all your questions and being here, it was really incredible and inspiring. So thank you for that. I just want to run through a couple of last minute things before I can't believe a whole hour is already gone. So before I say goodbye, I just want to say our next call will be on December 12th. And we have Toby Bellis from the Calgary Emergency Management Agency. We heard David Plouffe on an earlier call chatting with us. And so I think this will be a really important one to talk about Calgary Ready. In the next slide, we have some upcoming learning opportunities for you. Those of you who joined us with Dan, listening to Dan Duncan, I don't know if you did. It was an incredible webinar, and there was so much in it. We ran out of time. So we're actually having a whole separate section to do a question and answer series with him, because we know that lots of people have lots of questions, and we want to make sure we capitalize on all of that learning. So register for that event, and if you haven't seen the webinar, go ahead and watch that as well. You can reach out to me if you haven't seen it and need the link. We also have another webinar coming up with Lydia Kemeny and our own co-CEO Paul Bourne about looking at understanding participation and involvement and how those go hand in hand. So thank you again, everybody, for coming. Thank you especially to Stacey and Sarah for sharing your learnings with us. I hope that we can keep this conversation going. Stacey and Sarah, I just want to make sure that we can share your emails out with people if anybody has any questions.
Definitely, yes.
Of course, and if I could just do one final plug, I mentioned that we are looking at, we're looking at opportunities to share this approach further afield and considering the development of a train the trainer. So if anyone's interested in that, it would be really helpful for us to get a sense of that and what people's needs or suggestions might be around that. So we'd really welcome any feedback or thoughts.
That's great, thank you. Okay, anybody else with any final thoughts? Okay, thank you so much, everybody, and we'll see you in December.
Awesome, thanks, Linda.
Thank you.